to this program of the Captains of Industry broadcast on thiskingdom.com. My name is Nzul Kolstead. Today, we are exploring and examining the state of the poultry farming in Lesotho with regard to the chain management in the industry, looking at the viability and sustainability of this industry. We are also critically looking at the recent challenges that have beset the country, where our neighbor South Africa experienced an outbreak of avian flu, which forced the government of Lesotho to impose a ban on poultry products. This has had adverse implications for the country in terms of consumption of chicken, which Lesotho imports from South Africa. We are also going to explore lessons and the way forward, and also how to navigate solutions in the long term. I have on this platform Mr. Stephen Munyaman, who is the CEO and founder of Mon Foods, who's also an entrepreneur. Welcome, Mr. Munyaman.
Thank you very much, sir. I truly appreciate being here.
To start with, let's look at the context and the landscape of the poultry industry in the country, just briefly. Maybe let's say we are told that we import as a country about 2.1 billion worth of chicken every year. And also, this comes from South Africa, which is the historical and the main source of our poultry products. And that being the case, the question is, we know that we have we have proximity with South Africa, geographically, economically, and even policy-wise. And the question is, what could be the main cause of the problem that we are facing? Is this the annual total consumption of poultry products, mainly chicken, the 2.1 billion worth of chicken? Does it represent the total consumption of chicken in the country? In your view, and if not, what is the actual consumption of chicken in this country?
Thank you, Mr. Risted. That is the recorded number based on declaration. Let's bear in mind we still deal with under declaration. We still deal with smuggled chicken. But for purpose of today, let's take 2.1 billion as a true representation of the poultry industry, its value. And if we look at that and then imagine what it would be if that 2.1 billion is not eroded every year to South Africa, what would be the multiplier effect if that money stayed in Lesotho?
Yes, now we are prompting my second question. My second question is, Nyaman, are we producing just for consumption locally before we can import? And if ever we are producing poultry products for consumption, and how much are we producing? Is it enough? You may not be exact in terms of numbers, but just give us an indication in terms of, are we producing locally to the extent that we import more than 2 billion?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to give you exact numbers.
Oh, that's great. That's what I want.
So what we will do before we answer, are we producing enough?
Yes.
Let's go back and say, what is the total consumption of chicken in Lesotho recorded? So we import on a daily basis 90,000 beds equivalent. Now, if you take on average weight, okay, once you take a mature bed, slaughtered, its carcass weight is about 1.4 kgs. So if you take 90,000 beds, every single day, we are importing north of 120 tons. 120,000 kgs every single day. Let that sink in. This is the frozen chicken, okay? So your braai pack equivalent, your quarter legs, your drumsticks. That's the processed chicken, okay? Now I'm going to take you to another stage. which is another class. At our peak season, and I'll talk about the peaks, our peak is starting from next week, okay, leading to Easter. The day-old cheap market, we import 180,000 day-old chicks on a weekly basis. Okay? Our peak is mid-February all the way to the end of March, focusing on the Easter period. Then we have another peak season that is end of October, November leading to Christmas. Those are 180,000 plus day-old chicks per week. Okay? We have our normal season, which is warm enough for people to grow, but it's not peak because we're not rushing for large consumption of the festives. So that will then be from April to May. Okay? Then it will also be from August, September, and mid-October. During that period, we import approximately 125 to 130,000 day-old chicks per week. And then at our low season, which is our cold season, that is May, June, July, we import approximately 90,000 to 95,000 day-old chicks because it is cold and then it's more expensive to grow around that time. So these are two separate markets. The 90,000 beds per day I'm talking about, that is going to what is perceived to be your formal market. That is your retail, your restaurant, etc. Okay? The 180,000 I'm talking about per week, day-old chicks, that is perceived to be your informal market. Okay? So you have two markets that coexist. So naturally, as a country, at this point in time, we are not really producing for the retail market. We are producing for the informal, non-registered, local, like family consumption market.
Okay.
Yes.
With this market,
Mm-hmm.
because given what you have just explained,
Mm-hmm.
I get the impression that there's a market.
There is a serious business case.
Now, what are the challenges? What are the bottlenecks? What are the impediments that are facing Basotho local producers like yourselves to satisfy this huge market?
So the first thing that people will say access to finance. And the answer is money is not an issue. Most countries would have something called a poultry master plan for the nation, whereby would say, as a country, we consume 90,000 beds equivalent per day. And that 90,000 equivalent per day, it is constituted by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is our current situation. We want to achieve, I would call it import substitution, and then it's going to trade balances in such and such a year, right? So the country will then develop a poultry master plan that has the entire value chain, end to end. And it will then say, do we want to have our own grandparent stock? Do we want to have our own parent stock? Do we want to have our own hatcheries, our own farms, our own abattoirs, cold chains and distribution channels? Do we want to produce our own grain, have our own mills, right? And when I say our own, I'm not saying the government should own it. You have a master plan, and then you create an enabling environment for each component of that value chain to actually function.
Who develops this master plan?
So the master plan is a government document. Okay. A nation should have a direction of saying poultry is an industry that we believe, if it grows properly, it can have serious economic benefits to the country. So as a result, we are going to have a national master plan around it. Based on that, we are going to have enabling policies at each and every component of it. I'll give a typical example. If you set up a hatchery in Lesotho today, there's already a few that exist. Without having a contract to supply, you are basically putting money in, hoping that somebody will buy. You understand? That's why the value chain has to exist.
Yes, we'll talk about the value chain and you explain thoroughly how it goes. Let's now say it is my fervent belief that government, through the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, has researchers
Yes, they do.
who should be researching to bring this data that we're talking about to the fore. And I'm sure they are aware of these dynamics. And are they advising government, their own government, in terms of what pathways to navigate so that the country, not government, the country, let's when you say the country, I'm talking about the private sector, even maybe the government itself, exploit these huge markets. Are they doing that?
I am not in their offices, and I don't know the decisions that are made in that office. So I can't say they are advising or not advising. But what I would say is the result on the ground, if they were advising adequately, would see the results on the ground. At the moment, there's no results.
Okay, let's just take a short break. We'll come back. Welcome back. We are still on the topic of the poultry industry in the country, looking at the challenges, the opportunities, and the pathways that we can navigate as the country in terms of ensuring that this business is thriving. Dr. Mnyaman, before we went for a break, we're looking at what government is doing, what role it plays. But now, is there a clear policy that guides the poultry industry, so to speak, uh, as part of the bigger uh, government policy on agricultural production and food security?
So, like I said, I believe I have been in this industry for over 5 years. We've invested extensively to, if there was any, one would have come across. So I wouldn't want to say it does not exist. I have no evidence that it doesn't exist. But so far, with the level of investment and research we have done, there isn't a clear government pronouncement of the commercialization of the poultry industry or the industrialization thereof or the integrated growth thereof. So there isn't any clear stance on the development of the poultry value chain. So if you look at all these things, one is more likely to assume that it doesn't exist.
Okay. But from the private sector perspective, we have just learned from what you have said that this is a huge industry,
Yes.
poultry industry. Would you aver that government formulates a policy that guides how this poultry industry operates?
This industry, it's worth, if you look at the government budget, the annual budget, it's at about 21 billion, right? So this is already just under 10% of the government budget, if you talk about figure. I believe it is substantial enough for the government to see it as an industry that can change the country. If you look at the statistics of employment directly and indirectly, if you look at the employment that could be there if all the chicken consumed in Lesotho is to be produced in Lesotho, if you look at the impact on the trade balance and the trade deficit that this would bring if we were to if we were to produce all the poultry consumed in Lesotho, it says to you that it should be seen and perceived as one key industry that can move the economic trajectory of this country.
As private sector, if government is not moving closer to where you want it to go, you should be having private sector, public sector platforms or dialogue platforms where you engage government in terms of policy, in terms of putting forth your requirements, your needs and expectations as the private sector, because you broach yourselves as the engine of economic growth? Do we have such platforms?
The platforms are there. Even with the current ban, there's been enough dialogue between private sector and government. The question is it just a show, or do we really have the meaningful impact we desire? Because if we did, I don't think chicken would have been banned in the past 3 months. And I say this, has the private sector done everything? I can safely say to you, every single medium to large size poultry business, particularly on the broiler part, has never been able to function for more than 4 years in this country. Every single one of them that have started have failed. We too, as Mon Foods, have been grappling and barely staying alive because we've never operated for more than 6 months without interruption. And that interruption can be political, that interruption can be by willy-nilly policies that can be made by the government of Lesotho without a clear risk assessment, not only on what is happening externally, but the impact of the decision on the country. Right now, the biggest noise from the government is saying your chain stores don't have chicken, your restaurants have closed. We are not talking about over 40,000 broiler farmer growers, who has a ripple effect on the economy. We're not talking about street vendors who are cooking that chicken, which are over 10,000. We're not talking about farm feeds owners. You understand? That in every farm feed, 70% of the stock on the floor is poultry feed. We're not talking about that.
Okay, we'll get to the value chains. Now, I can see now we are now into the value chains. Now, let's look at what recently happened. The last 3 months. In October last year, South Africa announced that they're experiencing the avian flu. And that led to culling of more than 7 million chicken in that country. And at home, it prompted the government to impose a ban on poultry products, especially from South Africa. On the side of government as well, it meant that if it imposes a ban, it should find an alternative that's Plan B. And also it meant for local producers at home, the fast food chain stores, the restaurants, the individual sellers of chicken on the street, like we have indicated, and all those who are consuming chicken were affected direly by this impeachment. And it says it without, it really says that there was a huge loss on the side of fast food chain stores. There was also a loss in terms of those who are selling on the streets. With all these challenges, you think this was warranted?
So I will put it in a simple way. Lesotho is a member of international bodies. In this context is IOM, where the veterinary services subscribe to. So there are clear protocols of what do countries do when a country that supplies has issues of avian flu, for instance. Let's bear in mind, avian flu was first discovered in South Africa in 2003. So this disease or this thing has been there for the last 20 odd years. Okay? Now, every single month, South Africa will produce a report. This report is a very detailed document that will say which areas are hotspots of the disease, number one, which farms have been tested and declared free of avian flu, which farms have been affected, how many chickens have been culled, how many farms are quarantined. You understand? So there's a very clear document, scientific as well in its nature, that provides details. Okay? That was in October. So we used a report in October as the government or as the country to ban. Okay? November, the report came out. December, the report came out. January, the report came out. Now, I want any state vet to come here and then say there is a material difference. Okay? If you look at the November report, based on the number of farms that were cleared, based on the red spots, right? And compare it with the January report. And then say, based on the report we used to close, there's a material report, difference in the report we're using to open the borders. That's number one. Number two, every single day, there's approximately 25 million beds that are processed in South Africa. Okay? Let's say people live in a lap of luxury, so they eat quarter chicken. Okay? 25 million times 4. It means every single day there are 100 million chances of people being affected in South Africa. On a population of 60 to 61 million people. In this 3 to 4 months, there's never been a single case of anybody falling sick, number one, being hospitalized, or anybody dying.
So what are you implying? Are you implying that the reports were not reflective of the situation on the ground?
No. I'm saying the reports were reflective of the situation on the ground.
Okay.
So that data, my question to the government is, what metrics did we use to close and what metrics did we use today to open? If the reports materially, there's no difference. You understand? And if on a daily basis, there are 100 million chance of people being affected. So we need to then say, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a health professional, but you can immediately rule out the issue of health reasons or people falling sick. Because 100 million chances on a daily basis, 60 million people, no cases. To even of death. Let's take the second step. The government then said they want to protect the Lesotho industry. Okay? We don't have anybody who has parent stock in Lesotho.
So sorry, was the government's intervention by imposing the ban not a health-related issue?
So they claimed it was health-related. Okay. So I'm saying, show me scientific evidence that it's actually health-related. If we are having these instances whereby there is zero hospitalization over a population of 60 million people with more than 100 million chances daily of infection. There is enough research that has been published in South Africa by the University of Pretoria, University of Cape Town, using NCDC, talking about that there is a 0.1% chance, if ever the birds that were infected with the avian flu are consumed, there is a 0.1% chance of that then being transferred to a human being, right? So science is very clear around it. Now, that's the number one reason Lesotho closed. The number two reason was we are protecting our industry from having an outbreak in Lesotho. Okay? So when we protect industry, my question is this. Nobody has parent stock in Lesotho. Everybody has day-old chicks and broiler for 6 weeks. So after 6 weeks, all the farms should materially be empty, except for the layers. Okay? So if after 6 weeks, nobody has chicken in their farms, so which industry are we protecting? How many commercial layers farmers do we have in the country? So when you then look at it, you then say, we have over 40,000 broiler farmers growing 100, 200, 300 chickens versus we have 50 layer farmers. I'm giving an example, right? These are not the figures, don't quote me on them. I'm just giving you an example. You then look at it and say, what's the impact on this side? What's the impact on this side? Now, the government has a social contract to make sure that its laws and decisions do not have a significant economic effect on its citizens. So based on these two things, you then say, what would be the impact? And after that, then you then say, this will be the impact But these are our remedial actions. This is how we're going to make sure that we cushion, right, the impacted people because of the ban. So if there was a ban with no clear direction of saying this is, yes, there's a ban, but there's no alternative. Later on, an alternative came out. The alternative is go to Swaziland to get meat. Now, my question is this: Swaziland still import fertile eggs that we have banned.
Okay, it imports from South Africa.
They import fertile eggs from South Africa, hatch them in Swaziland, grow the chicken, process the meat. We then come in, we then say that meat is fine. But we ban Basotho from importing fertile eggs to hatch them in Lesotho.
Okay, tell me, there was also intimation of why can't Lesotho go to other provinces, since it's only Johannesburg or Gauteng which is involved, which is affected. Would that stand?
That is why I said to you earlier on, the report that South Africa produces will show you a red spot by province, will show you the farms that have been cleared countrywide, and the farms that were cleared in November are still cleared today. The farms that we are now today recommended to go to have always been cleared of the disease. At least more than 90% of them.
Do you think there was a hidden, there was some reason different from what has been put forth by government for banning the import of chicken?
I'm not a propaganda theorist, so I would not go to that part. But I would then say, was this decision made based on facts, data? Was it made in the best interest of Basotho and the economy? Could we then say that the government looked at all areas and made a sound decision in the ultimate interest of Basotho? That I leave to people to then answer themselves.
Yes.
But in my opinion, there are more businesses that have been destroyed. The economy has been decimated. And there's no remedial action.
Okay. When we come back, we'll discuss this matter of the over-reliance of the country on South Africa and if there are local remedial action that we can take. Let's take a break. Thank you, sir. Welcome back. We are still on the crucial topic of poultry farming and how we can develop it for sustainable development of the country. Dr. Minyaman, let's look at the issue of over-reliance of Lesotho on South Africa as regards the poultry products. We talk of chicken for meat consumption and eggs and others, but let's focus on chicken for meat consumption. What remedy can we propose for addressing these over-reliance? Maybe say project for 2 years.
Okay. So let's start it back. Less than 10 years ago, Swaziland was overly reliant on South Africa. Botswana was, Namibia was. Okay. What have our neighbors done? What did they do? They formulated a national strategic plan around poultry. They have a poultry master plan. They then availed necessary resources from a developmental standpoint, not commercial banks, to be able to build that industry. They then brought different financial tools or instruments where you are combining owner's equity, you're combining development finance, you're combining commercial banks, and then you're combining suppliers' contribution to then build these industries. So it's almost creating an enabling policy for them to grow. Today, Namibia is able to produce at least 80% of that consumption. Botswana is able to produce 80% of that consumption. So is Swaziland, where once upon a time they were reliant to. What has been the impact of that to those countries? the economic impact and growth that this industry has brought. Remember, we're still part of SACU, which is a free market within reason. I get it. So what they do now, they use a quota system to temporarily ban what they have in excess supply and open up what they don't have. And fortunately, you will realize that Lesotho already practiced that in other sectors. Yesterday, there was a press conference whereby there's going to be a temporary ban on importation of tomato and apples because we're producing in excess. How did these tomatoes come about? There was SADP and many other programs that funded the growth of that industry. That today commercial farmers are able to produce the supply that is required. If you looked at the apples, they were a World Bank funded project. So we're still talking about what? Development fund intervention and policy interventions. That today we can say for a particular season, we can produce excess of apples. In the same manner, what we require as a country is a poultry master plan, which will then have government intervention, development finance intervention, private equity intervention, community interventions, because every single Mosotho within reason own land, and we need land to produce. So somebody can come with that, because based on the 2010 Land Act, if I'm not mistaken, the idea behind that was so that as a Mosotho, I can use my land as collateral for economic participation. So we can bring that model that allows us to then say, how many hectares of land do we need to produce? Who has the land, the hectares of land? What's the cost per square meter? So there's somebody who contributes something, and we're able to build an industry as a whole. And then, like our neighbors, with time, we start saying, okay, we are at the stage whereby now we have sufficient parent stock, so we're able to produce enough fertile eggs. So we would put a temporary ban on fertile eggs because you can produce sufficient fertile eggs. We are now being able to hatch, so it's a gradual move as you go. And eventually you then talk about quota systems, whereby you then tell your chain stores that you can only import X amount of frozen chicken, the rest you then bring it from Lesotho. You buy from Lesotho. You then introduce things like enterprise development program to then say, we're going to have a policy saying, I have this product I want. You then have to show, Horana, what interventions do you have in place to ensure that you're playing your part in securing that locally? We can then use tax incentives to then say, if you put X amount of money or X amount of percentage of your money into growing industry, these are tax benefits that you'll be able to receive. So it's not a ministry intervention. It is a national intervention. Yes.
Now let's see. Are you unionized as poultry farmers, or do you have a platform that you come together, discuss policy issues, and make submissions to government on your proposals regarding what you just talked about?
I'm glad you used the word unionize. By nature, unions, and excuse my ignorance, are normally for people crying out for help and trying to find a common ground to fight a particular cause.
Okay, let me say, do you have an association?
No, allow me to take it a step further.
Okay.
Now, when you look at the neighbor, they have what you call South African Poultry Association. Now, an association is then established when you have enough players who are large enough and have something substantial at stake, and they have something to lose. So at that stage, they will then be part of the team that formulate policy, because they can afford to hire people that formulate policy. They are able to channel research. They are able to lobby. You understand? When they stand head to head with government, when they bring the numbers in terms of economic significance, they are able to call the attention of the government because of their economic contribution, not crying for help. So, unfortunately, where we are as a poultry industry in Lesotho, yes, there are a number of associations that exist, but we are such small farmers.
Or
You understand?
smallholder.
So, smallholder farmers. So, we are crying for help. We're not saying this is the value that we bring to the table. This industry is worth X amount. This decision that you make is going to mean X amount of taxes will be affected.
Okay. So in essence, we are saying an association should be a platform that proposes alternatives to government, but does not seek help from government.
No, you'll need help from government because ultimately every policy, even finance and right? But what I'm talking about is economic significance for you to be able to call the attention of government. And I'm not talking about political, because when you talk about political, if you are unionized, more than anything, you are a lobby group that could have a significant impact politically.
Exactly. Now let's venture into managing value chain. Can you unpack the whole poultry value chain and maybe at each stage explain how it affects how the poultry industry behaves?
So let's start it here. So you have predominantly three genotypes of the poultry. The poultry. You have your Ross 308, you have your COP 500, you have your Abba Acre. These have been developed over centuries. Okay, those are IPs owned by multinationals. So for us to develop our own unique genotype takes forever. But what can we do? By partnering with those multinationals, we can be able to have what you call our own parent stock. We can start there. To build a parent stock industry that will be able to supply all the country's needs requires approximately 80 million malut. With this 80 million malut, I promise you, if there is a mixture of instruments used, where there is government support, there's development finance, there is private investment, you will need only about 40 million maluti of support. And the other 40 million can be raised by private players who would go into this space. Done correctly in a commercially viable space, you need 5 to 10 farmers to do that. The second stage will then be your hatchery. Okay? You will need approximately 150 million malut to build end-to-end the entire hatchery business that is required to supply all the country's demand.
I'm sure you're not talking about Marcelo.
I'm talking about countries, decentralized, countrywide.
Yeah.
And this, you talk about 3 large enough hatcheries. Let's say you put one central, south, and north. You will then need to have medical professional services, and this is capacitating the Department of Livestock, making sure that they have clear veterinary services, biosecurity and hygiene, nutrition, food safety, research, labs, monitoring and evaluation. That would require about 10 million. You will then need either to then go through the farm feed. Whether are we using the existing milling companies that are there and then creating a grains production program whereby we say we need X amount of soya bean, X amount of sunflower, X amount of yellow maize. And then people plow knowing that a ton would cost X, will fetch me X amount, and there are so many tons required. Whereby then the milling company will then go and provide technical support that is structured so that people are able to produce the required product at the end. They already have land. And that on its own would require approximately 10 million, 60 million. Now, you then come to broiler farms. Okay? Now you have the parent stock. Now you have the hatcheries. Now you have the production of feed required. You would need approximately about 150 million as well to grow the farmhouses. And this, you can do it through community trust, whereby we then say a typical farm sits over 10 hectares. And we are able to acquire 10 hectares in this area. The owners of those fields come in as equity partners by transferring their land to the business and then buying them equity into the business. We then find financing models that will then work. You will need 60 houses with a capacity of 45,000 beds each to be able to meet the current importation numbers. We start there, right? And then because of biosecurity measures and being in disease control, you can't have all those houses in one area. You then spread them across 10-meter radiuses or distance in between kilometers to manage the disease, or you can put them wherever possible. These will be environmentally controlled houses, so they don't worry whether it's winter or summer. They use EV methods to grow the beds. You understand? And then we take it a step further. You will need about 3 abattoirs, each with the capacity to process 60,000 beds a day, dotted around the country. From there, and this abattoirs would require plus or minus 42 million. Take it a step further, you will then need your cold chain, people who are now transporting this processed meat into distributions and warehouses across the country. And then eventually you will then go to retail and. So when you look at this end to end, it requires approximately 452 million, which is less than the government subsidy on fertilizer and seeds that we don't even see the yield of per annum. If we do this, there is a possibility that in less than 24 months, and I repeat, that Lesotho would have stopped being reliant on South Africa. And imagine what the circulation of 2.1 billion can do to this economy.
Before the master plan, can this happen?
I can give one. It's here. Take it. It's free. We've invested over 2 million building it for the sake of this country and building this industry, because if we don't do this, we who have invested in this industry are also going to die. So we're going to lose the investment anyway. So why don't we then build it together?
Tell me, is it a technical challenge to government, or is it a financial challenge? Is it a human resource challenge? Or what challenge?
The willingness.
Willingness.
What is the what you see? As a government, your role is to then say, how do we have a working environment that allows business to thrive beyond one individual? This is not that no one individual can build this on their own. I mean, if I was to give you the stats of if we're to follow this model, how many new companies or existing companies would create? We're talking over 60 companies. We're talking over 20,000 new jobs that could be created. That's the direct ones. Forget about the indirect jobs. You understand? And you can think about the economic impact overall. So what it is to then say, as a country, what's our goal? Where are we going? What do you want to achieve? And my question is this. Now we've had the bad. We have seen how catastrophic this could be. And yes, your restaurants have been affected. That is a small component of people who have been affected. You understand? So if we're to look at it and say, we have seen, how do we take this crisis? And in Winston Churchill's words, how do we never let a good crisis go to waste?
Now, in closing, now, way forward. What is the way forward? How do we navigate pathways moving forward from here? We have seen this, we have experienced the ban, we have seen its implications. We are seated here and we don't want this to repeat itself again. How do we move forward?
One, call every player, set up a task team, and then say, let us map out a national master plan. Let us then talk about what are the financial requirements. Let us talk about what sort of policy and regulatory environment that we need. And based on that, let us then develop a rollout plan over the next 24 or 48 months that we will then grow this industry. Let us put milestones that we would want to achieve. Let us then say, how do we unlock resource? Whether it's going to be FDI, whether it's going to be domestic investment, what do we do to then make sure that we focus our energy towards that? And what is our outcome? And once we have clear performance indicators in the space, we'll be able to then say we put 10 million and this is our output. We managed to put 20 million, this is our output. And year on year, we have clear monitoring and evaluation indicators of saying, are we achieving our goal? And I think it comes by first realizing what is the value. Once you recognize the value of anything, you will then deploy relevant resources, whether it be human, legal, or financial resources to ensure that you achieve that goal.
Thanks very much, Ndad, for your time and your contribution. We have come to the end of our program. We have discussed at length the challenges that face the poultry industry in the country. We have looked at the experience that we had as a country when the government imposed a ban on poultry products as a result of South Africa experiencing avian flu. We have seen how it has impacted on the fast food industry. It has impacted on small scale businesses on the street. It has impacted on the economy. And of course, we are yet to get a glimpse of the economic loss in general. With these words, I think I should thank my panelist, Nade Munyamani, who is the CEO of Mon Foods and also an entrepreneur. Nade Munyamani, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, sir, and I really appreciate this opportunity.